All right, let's take a look at how to set up your MIDI devices to work with Live 12. So I've got a default set open, and let's go into Settings, which again is under the Live menu on a Mac or the Options menu on a PC. Now once there, I'm going to drop down and I'm going to select the Link Tempo and MIDI tab. So when you hook up a MIDI keyboard or some kind of a MIDI controller to your computer or laptop, it's likely that it's going to immediately show up down here in the input ports or output ports area. And that's because most MIDI devices are said now to be class compliant, meaning that they've been designed to work with the MIDI driver that's part of the operating system on your computer, whether you're on a Mac or on a PC. Now, other devices have been manufactured to work closely with Ableton, and those devices are said to be native. In the case of those devices, you can select them in this MIDI area, and you notice when I click on that, there are literally dozens of devices. So I've gone in and I've selected my native devices, which include here a Push 3 and a Launch Key Mark III. I've also got a Launchpad Pro, which is not currently hooked up, and that's why these are kind of grayed out. And then over here to the right, I've gone in and I've read the information in the owner's manual, and I've set the appropriate input and output ports. There's often more than one option, so you're going to want to make sure that you read this. So I've set those, and you'll notice that not only do they show up here, but they also show up in the input and output ports area. And in that area, we can determine exactly how the device is going to be able to work with Ableton, and that's because of these 4 columns, the track, sync, remote, and MPE columns. You'll notice that we have checkboxes which enable these options. So the track column is for basic MIDI messages like note on and note off messages. Your keyboard might be hooked up correctly, and when you hit the key, you may not hear any sound, and that's because it may be that this column has been disabled for that device. So you're going to want to make sure that you enable the checkboxes in this column for all the devices where you're going to want to be sending those basic MIDI messages. Next, we have the sync column, and that's for external devices that have a sequencer built into them. And that could be a keyboard workstation or a drum machine or an MPC player or something of that nature. And if you enable the sync option here, when you hit play or stop in Ableton, it's going to send information out to those devices and trigger the sequences. Now you'll notice that when I enable one of these sync options, I also get this EXT button that shows up in the control bar. And if you want to be able to actually control Ableton from this external device, for example, being able to hit play or stop on those devices, you're going to want to make sure that you enable this button here that's on the control bar. Now, I'm not using any devices like that, so I'm going to disable that. The next column over allows us to control Ableton with the often 8 knobs that are built into your controller that allow for external control of Ableton devices. If this column isn't checked or this checkbox is not enabled, you can go ahead and you can map one of your knobs on your keyboard to a device in Ableton, but it won't actually be able to control it until you enable that functionality for the device. And then last but not least over here, we have a column for MPE, which stands for MIDI Polyphonic Expression. So MPE is fairly new to the MIDI protocol, and it gives extended control over expressive features. And there aren't many devices that are available now that actually take advantage of that. The Push 3 is one. There's also a couple of keyboards from Roley, and there's one from Keith McMillan that I'm aware of that allow for MIDI polyphonic expression. So again, if you have one of those devices and you want to be able to take advantage of that functionality, you've got to enable it here. Now, if your MIDI keyboard or controller device is nowhere to be found here, it's likely because you need to load a third-party driver. So go to the manufacturer's website and look for their drivers. download it, install it on your computer, and then you should see your device pop up down here in the input ports and output ports areas. Okay, I'm going to hit escape to get out of here. And I'm going to go ahead and hit a key on my keyboard to see if Ableton is receiving MIDI from that device. Now, when I do that, you'll notice up here that these boxes light up. These are your input and output MIDI boxes that just show you that there's activity. Okay, so that's working. Let's finish this by just double checking to make sure that we can make sound. So I'm going to grab a default preset here from the instruments area of the browser, and I'm going to drag and drop it on this first MIDI track. Now the track is in record, so when I hit a key on my keyboard, it should pass MIDI to the device and we should hear sound. So when the track is in record, it's said to be MIDI through capable of passing that MIDI information. So let me do that. Okay, so now that we see MIDI and we hear MIDI input, our controller devices are ready to work with Ableton.